Philip Larkin was an English poet who was influential both at the time of his life but also since his death. In fact, he was offered the prestigious position of poet laureate, and one of his poems, perhaps one of the most well-remembered ones, This Be the Verse, was voted as one of the UK's top 100 favourite poems of all time. Larkin was generally a pessimist, and for anyone who knows this poem in question, they know that it ends with this stanza: "Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself." And this leads us on to the topic of today's video: was Philip Larkin antinatalist? Now, of course, a solid place to start is to see whether he had any biological children or not, and he didn't. He was, as I've already mentioned, a pessimist. His pessimistic outlook on life can be seen running through several of his poems and was noted on by many commentators at the time and since his death. For example, in The Unquickened World, a study of the poetry and novels of Philip Larkin by James Calvin Feltham, he comments on the pessimistic vein that runs through Larkin's poetry. Larkin's poetry and novels portray many aspects and views of the harsh reality of the average man's life, particularly the average man of the 20th century. It is an often depressing and pessimistic world picture, but it is a place that most of us at one time or another inhabit. So this all bodes well for him harboring antinatalist views, but what's of real interest is this poem that I've already mentioned, This Be the Verse. So let's take a look at it. Here is a recording of Philip Larkin himself reading out the poem.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern, and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
Now, of course, poetry as a format or a medium is not really conducive to presenting fully fleshed out arguments for things, let alone antinatalism. However, we do seem to see at least a conditional, if not general, piece of advice cautioning against procreation. The reason I say it might be conditional is because the emphasis seems to be put on this trauma handed down from generation to generation. And perhaps if somehow humanity were able to rectify this, Larkin wouldn't offer the same advice as to not have children. But he does offer this advice, and given that he's known for his pessimism, I doubt he thought that humanity would overcome this cascade of trauma throughout the generations. You'd have to be extremely naive to think that humanity could overcome that. A key thing I want to note on is that this advice to not have children seems to be done out of concern for the children themselves, because misery will be passed down. It's a philanthropic antinatalist concern. So I think it's reasonable to say at least that the poem carries antinatalistic messaging. And an interesting thing to note on that I came across while researching this video is that Larkin was a great fan of W.H. Auden, who was another influential British poet who may have also been an antinatalist, although it is unconfirmed. I've done an antinatalist analysis of Auden's poem Death's Echo, which I've linked below if you want to check it out. In fact, it's reported that Larkin attended Auden's memorial service in Christchurch in Oxford, and if the authors of these poems are as their poems suggest, then this could have been one respected antinatalist poet attending the memorial service of another. I wonder if they knew about each other's sentiments on the topic of procreation. But anyway, going back to This Be the Verse, I mentioned that it was a particularly well-liked poem, and it's been referenced in quite a few other creative endeavours in the English language. So for example, Lemony Snicket quotes the last stanza in the series of Unfortunate Events. Here is that from the TV adaptation.
Man hands on misery to man.
It deepens like a coastal shelf.
Get out as early as you can. And don't have any kids yourself.
And I recently went to see the film Speak No Evil, where This Be the Verse is recited in full by one of the main characters played by James McAvoy. So in conclusion, Philip Larkin was generally a pessimist and seemed not to be the biggest fan of life. This Be the Verse seems to carry a clear anti-procreative message, but I'm hesitant to label Larkin as a full-fledged antinatalist. Whilst the evidence does seem to suggest in the direction of him being an antinatalist, it's hard to say that we have enough evidence to say he is and feels safe about it. So was he? Probably, but it's unconfirmed. Anyway, let me know if I missed anything to do with Philip Larkin and antinatalism, and I'll see you in the next one.